Sarah Williams, a 78-year-old black woman, wheeled herself down her neighborhood's worn streets. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the cracked sidewalks and aging buildings, and the scent of fresh rain from a morning storm lingered in the air. The wheels of Sarah's well-worn wheelchair squeaked, a sound she'd long since grown used to. Life hadn't been easy, but Sarah was resilient. She'd endured the many injustices of her youth, knowing life would often judge her for the color of her skin. Her spirit remained unbroken despite her body's limitations. She was thinking about her son, Jacob Williams, the President of the United States. Jacob had always been her pride and joy, a beacon of hope for their family. Seeing him reach the highest office in the nation was nothing short of miraculous given their humble beginnings. But her joy was tinged with sadness. Jacob was so busy now, and she missed the days when he'd stop by to visit her each weekend. Today, Sarah was focused on making her way home. She'd picked up a few groceries and balanced the small bag on her lap. She rolled steadily along, ignoring the uneasy looks from passing strangers. She knew that she didn't fit their ideal of this neighborhood, but she didn't care. Turning a corner, Sarah noticed two police officers standing by their patrol car, which was parked at an odd angle on the sidewalk. The younger of the two, Officer Chad Bradley, noticed her first. He nudged his partner, Officer Ron Harris, and they exchanged whispers before both began walking toward her. Sarah felt a twinge of dread. She'd avoided trouble with the police all her life, but something in their expressions warned her that her luck might be running out. "Hey, you there," Officer Bradley called out, his tone authoritative. "Hold up a second." Sarah stopped her wheelchair and looked up at the two men, offering a polite smile despite her nervousness. "Yes, officers? Is something wrong?" Bradley, a man in his 30s with an arrogant smirk, crossed his arms and looked Sarah up and down. "What are you doing out here?" "I'm heading home," she replied evenly. "I live just down the street." Bradley's gaze shifted to her groceries, then her wheelchair. "That's so? You sure you're really disabled?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the blatant accusation. "Yes, sir," she stammered. "I've been in this chair for nearly a decade since a car accident." Bradley snorted. "Right. You know how many people try to game the system by pretending to be crippled?" His partner Harris, a man with a permanent scowl, stepped forward, his shadow looming over Sarah. "Why don't you just stand up and prove you're really what you say you are?" Sarah felt her stomach twist. She'd heard about encounters like this, but she never thought it would happen to her. "I can't stand," she said softly. "I'm paralyzed from the waist down." "Convenient," Bradley sneered, taking a step closer. Sarah gripped her wheelchair tightly, fear rising within her. She'd faced racism her whole life, but something about this encounter felt even more menacing. "Look," she said, forcing her tone to stay calm. "I'm just trying to get home. Please, let me go." Bradley smirked, his eyes narrowing. "We don't just let people go when they're up to something." "I'm not up to anything," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I just want to get home." Harris scoffed. "Yeah, we've heard that one before." Bradley grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and shoved it backward, tipping her slightly off balance. Sarah gasped as her groceries spilled onto the sidewalk, a bottle of milk rolling away as it leaked onto the concrete. What are you doing?" Sarah cried, her voice shaking with panic. Ignoring her protests, Bradley sneered. "Let's see how fast you can roll." Harris laughed as Bradley pushed the wheelchair faster, and Sarah struggled to grab the wheels. Desperately trying to stop, she could hear her own breath quicken, heart pounding as the speed grew unmanageable. Finally, Bradley jerked the chair to a halt. Sarah lurched forward, barely managing to keep herself from falling out. She could feel tears prickling in her eyes, but she refused to give these men the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Bradley leaned in close, his breath hot against her cheek. "You think you're special, don't you? You think your fancy son can protect you?" Sarah's blood ran cold. How did they know about Jacob? She never told anyone in the neighborhood. Yet somehow, these officers knew, and that knowledge filled her with even more dread. Harris leaned down beside Bradley. "Yeah, we know about your kid. Doesn't matter out here, though. You're just another black woman to us." Sarah's heart raced. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. She needed to survive this encounter. A few neighbors stood watching from a distance, concerned but unwilling to intervene. Sarah noticed a young woman holding up her phone. discreetly recording, but the officers were too focused on their fun to notice. The encounter worsened as Harris continued taunting her. "Living off our taxes, right? I bet you've got one of those fat government checks coming in every month." Sarah felt the sting of their words but kept her composure. She'd faced judgment before, but this cruelty cut deep. It was different now. These men had power, and they wanted to remind her of it. Suddenly, Bradley grabbed her wheelchair and started pushing it down the street. "Stop, please," Sarah begged, but Bradley was relentless, letting go abruptly as the wheelchair veered toward the curb. Sarah's hands slipped from the wheels, and she desperately grabbed the armrests just in time to prevent herself from toppling over. "Can't keep up, Grandma?" Harris mocked. Sarah felt humiliated and helpless. Without warning, Bradley pulled out his handcuffs. "We're taking you in. Let's see if the station is as impressed with your story as we are." Fear tightened in Sarah's chest. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong." Ignoring her pleas, Bradley roughly cuffed her hands behind her back, then pulled her out of the wheelchair, causing her to collapse on the sidewalk. Sarah winced in pain, her legs uselessly dragging as Harris and Bradley hauled her to the patrol car. She had never felt so powerless, so utterly humiliated. They threw her into the backseat, her body crumpling awkwardly against the hard seat. She lay there helpless, her body sore and her spirit broken. As they drove off, Sarah looked out the window, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had never felt more alone. In the Oval Office, President Jacob Williams was preparing for a meeting when his chief of staff, Rachel Stevens, entered, her face pale and tense. "Mr. President, I think you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. Jacob's heart sank as he watched the grainy cell phone video. There was his mother, his beloved mother, helpless in her wheelchair, surrounded by the two officers who threw her out of the chair, taunting and shoving her. Jacob's hands clenched as the video ended with his mother, bruised and handcuffed, lying helpless in the patrol car. Rage simmered within him. How could this happen? "Where is she now?" Jacob demanded, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel answered, "She's being held at the local precinct. We've dispatched a team to investigate." Jacob didn't hesitate. "Get me the Attorney General. I want this handled now." Minutes later, Jacob spoke with the Attorney General. "John Harrell, my mother was assaulted. I want those officers charged." Immediately, John responded, "We're taking this seriously, Mr. President. We'll have her released as soon as possible and ensure that the officers face consequences." "It's not enough, John," Jacob said, voice steely. "This can't happen to anyone else. Make sure this is dealt with swiftly." After the call, Jacob prepared to head to the precinct himself. His security team advised against it, but he was resolute. His mother needed him, and he wasn't going to sit idly by. At the precinct, a crowd had gathered, protesters demanding justice. When Jacob arrived, flanked by his security, the crowd fell silent in respect. Reporters shouted questions, but Jacob ignored them, his focus on his mother. Inside, the officers were visibly nervous as Jacob approached. "Where is my mother?" he asked the desk sergeant, his tone deadly calm. The sergeant stammered and quickly led him to the holding cells, where Jacob saw Sarah sitting on a cold bench, her hands still cuffed. She looked up, and her eyes filled with relief. "Jacob," she whispered, voice cracking. Jacob knelt before her. "I'm here, Mom. I'm so sorry." As they left the precinct together, the crowd erupted in cheers. But for Jacob, this was only the beginning. Justice had to be served. News of Sarah's arrest spread nationwide, sparking outrage. Protests erupted in major cities, with signs reading, "Justice for Sarah," and "End police brutality." The incident became a catalyst for a larger movement against racial injustice. Jacob addressed the nation from the Oval Office, his voice steady but passionate. "What happened to my mother is a painful reminder of the systemic injustices that persist in our society. This will not stand." His administration swiftly filed charges against officers Bradley and Harris, and the pressure to pass comprehensive police reform mounted. A year later, Congress passed the Sarah Williams Justice Act, mandating independent investigations for police misconduct and banning excessive use of force. The day after the bill passed, Jacob sat beside his mother in the White House gardens. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with pride and relief. Sarah smiled. resting her hand on his. "You've brought us a step closer to justice for everyone." Together, they watched the sunset, knowing that while the fight for true justice was far from over, they had ignited a movement that would bring lasting change. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for future uploads. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And check out our other videos for more powerful stories.